Hello, and welcome to the first episode of our podcast, Hands on Earth. In this meetup, we'll discuss about something present in everyone's house, more specifically in everyone's food, pesticides. How is it connected to food systems? How does it affect humans and whole ecosystems? What are the aspects incentivizing its usage? Why do we need them? Do we really need them? Stay tuned as we dive into all these questions, bringing along historical and economic facts, as well as perspectives from both the environmental movement and the industrial sector. Food supply and food security are probably the main reasons why we started using pesticides. In 1845, potato fields in Ireland were invaded by a fungal disease, rapidly infesting the staple crop. The result? 1 million people died of famine, and over a million more were forced to leave Ireland. In order to avoid such catastrophe from happening again, over 5 billion pounds of pesticides are showered across the earth today. It is quite shocking to think that such chemicals are so close to our daily life and are part of such an important aspect of our existence, and still, most of us think we are powerless when it comes to being away from it. I believe information and accessibility to knowledge are key so we can empower people to take control of their own choices. That's partly why we are here today, so let's dive in. The food we eat today is grown far away from our site, and this distance can result in a lack of interest from consumers to know how they are produced, what are the stages until the food reaches supermarkets, and what efforts are involved in making that food arrive in our homes. The peak of the environmental movement started somewhere around the 60s, and the North American Rachel Carson, with her book Silent Spring, published in 1962, was an important voice in bringing awareness and shedding light on the issue around the use of pesticides in crop production. With this book, she both inspired environmental movements across the US and was target of criticism by industries and governments, which were led mostly by men at the time. Rachel Carson was surely a brave woman to step up as a scientist in a society dominated by men and to go against powerful industry. You go, Rachel. So one of the most well-known insecticides, and the one Rachel Carson was mainly against, is DDT, dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane. DDT, discovered by the Swiss chemist Paul Hermann Müller, who, bear in mind, won a Nobel Prize for it, was originally used during World War II to shield crops from insects and protect soldiers from insect-borne diseases. After the war, this chemical was used regularly to secure food supply. Rachel's main concern was the alarming spread of pesticides use without acknowledging the threats it posed to society and ecosystems. In addition, the chemicals present in DDT persist for a long time in the environment and in animal tissues, posing long-term harms. Low to moderate exposures, around 10 milligrams per kilogram, can cause nausea, diarrhea, irritation of eyes, nose, or throat. Higher doses, around 16 milligrams per kilogram, can lead to extreme effects such as tremors and convulsions. For example, for people occupationally exposed to DDT, it was even found possible chromosomal damage. A movement started by Rachel led to the use of DDT being no longer permitted in the US from 1972. Because it has low solubility, higher rates of bioaccumulation in water, and low decay rate, it proliferates through the entire food web, ultimately reaching humans. Alongside DDT, other insecticides such as endrine, aldrin, and diodrin are also harmful, sometimes even more than DDT, as is the case of diodrin. This chemical is about 5 times as toxic as DDT if swallowed, but 40 times as toxic when absorbed through the skin in solution. Decrease in bird populations, poisoning of water sources, long-term harm to humans. These are some of the consequences of using DDT and other insecticides. And by indiscriminate usage of those, it kills the weakest insects, leaving the most resistant ones. Those then pass such resistance through generations. That led to the rise of superbugs, such as the Colorado potato beetle, which is resistant to over 50 different insecticides. And so we must keep changing or upgrading the variety of pesticides. Seems like an endless road. So what is the way to go? We do need to assure we have enough food for the 7 billion people on Earth, but we also need to consider the way we are doing that. Concerns regarding pesticides are also within matters of international agreements, such as the EU Mercosur Free Trade Agreement. In this case, the agreement focuses on economic benefits for theoretically both parties, both Mercosur and the EU countries. In economic terms, this is not what occurs, but that is not the focus of this talk. Rather, what I would like to emphasize is how such trade affects the agricultural sector and, consequently, pesticides governance in an unfair way. Brazil, being one of the major countries composing the Mercosur Party, plays a big role on this agreement. Increasingly, countries from Mercosur are characterized as exporters of agricultural products, while importers of industrialized products from the European Union. In that sense, Brazil has placed itself as in the world economy by producing commodities and biofuel, and diminish the staple food production for their own population. This production option is done towards economic growth and is causing human and environmental harms. One of the reasons why it is harmful is due to the use of chemical substances, mostly pesticides, many of which are produced by industry based in European countries, which, however, does not allow the use of such substances in its own territories. This commercial relationship is therefore built upon much controversy. That is indeed something to consider when working within the agricultural field, which can be detached from use of chemical substances nowadays. This really makes me think whether local agriculture focused on local markets could be an alternative. Agriculture and the battle against pests, mainly insects, comes from ancient times. There is evidence of humans recruiting other insects to tackle the ones considered pests since 300 AD, where farmers from China bred predatory ants in orange orchids to protect the trees from other bugs. This would now be called biological pest control and could even enter under the scope of agroecology. Could the solution be towards such path? Biological pest control has been a high topic among environmentalists. Maybe it is time for ancient techniques to come back. But that's a story for another talk. I hope this was a nice, informative time we spent together. Thank you so much for tuning in and see you in our next episode where we go deeper on alternatives to replace or diminish chemicals usage. See you soon!